Dave Palumbo here with a very special topic to talk about today. Insulin application in bodybuilding. We all know out there that bodybuilders today are obsessed with the use of insulin. And the problem is that most people don't know what insulin does, how it's produced, why you take it, what types, fast acting, slow acting, super slow acting, basal insulins. There's so many misnomers out there and so many irresponsible things being done by bodybuilders who think that they have the magic bullet or the secret potion to getting big Rami monster size. And that's unfortunately most of the time just not the case. Now I have with us today very special guest who happens to be an expert on insulin. And I people think I'm an insulin expert. She's way bigger of an insulin expert because number one, she's a type 1 diabetic her whole life. She's a professional bodybuilder, IFBB Pro bodybuilder. She's a certified diabetes educator. She's a certified nutritionist. And there's probably a million other initials that I've forgotten. So let's get her here and she can tell us what all her qualifications are. I'd like to welcome Colette Nelson to the show.
Hello, Dave. How are you?
Hey, did I forget any of your initials?
All right. So it's a master's in science, bachelor's in dietetics, registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, board certified sports specialist dietitian, and certified dietetic nutritionist. And going to be an RN. In 2 years, you'll be able to throw an RN on there, Dave. What do you think about that?
And then 3 years later, you'll probably be an MD for all we know.
Then I'll be an NP. I'll be a nurse practitioner. So I'll be able to be a provider. Finally.
Okay. Well, obviously you were diagnosed at a very young age with type 1 diabetes, which back, I guess, when you were diagnosed with it, they gave you the old, it's going to be cured by the time you're an adult,
yeah,
right?
10 years. It's been 32. Thanks. Thanks for the advice.
Yeah. So essentially, you had to basically learn how to take insulin properly. Since why don't you explain what insulin is and what it's used for, so for people who might not know anything about it, and then explain to you how you developed your techniques to control your blood sugar.
Okay, I think we have to start with understanding there's an incredible difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Okay, that always really frustrates me because they're actually two different diseases with the only thing in common being hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar. So when you categorize type 1 diabetes, it's an autoimmune disease. And there's actually, and Dave, you and I know this, there's actually 30% of your type 2s, which is not an autoimmune disease, that are misdiagnosed that are actually type 1s, otherwise known as type 1.5 or LADA, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in the adult. So me and you, Dave, have diagnosed, through our history, so many of these, I can't even tell you right off the top of my head.
A lot of bodybuilders.
Yeah, a lot of them. So it's that they don't call it, remember when they used to call it non-insulin dependent and insulin dependent or juvenile? Right. We don't do that anymore. It's called type 1, type 1.5, type 2, and actually now type 3. It's a whole different categorization of diabetes now that's going to happen within the next year.
In diabetes, what's essentially happening is that the sugar that's circulating through your blood can't get into the cells because there's either not enough insulin present or there's none. In your case, so there's none.
Type 1 autoimmune disease, the immune system looks at the beta cell as foreign, attacks it, it's game over, you make no insulin, there is no choice. You have to inject insulin. When people say you can cure your type 1 diabetes, really? That is not true. There are some things that are going on right now in the research that in clinical trials maybe, but not the layperson taking vanadyl sulfate with type 1 diabetes. It's not going to cure the type 1 diabetes. It's an autoimmune disease. It's two-pronged. Even if you cure the beta cell, even if you give a beta cell transplant, you got to give autoimmune drugs. You still got to deal with your own autoimmunity. Eventually, the beta cell ligand fail unless we address those two issues. We need to replenish beta cells and we need to figure out the autoimmunity. Right. So we haven't actually been able to cure any autoimmune disease. So that's been an issue that's on the horizon to hopefully work with.
So let's talk about what you need as a type 1 diabetic, someone who doesn't produce any insulin, what you need on a daily basis to regulate your blood sugar. Because there's several steps. And I only know this because I know you very well. It's not just take a shot at every meal. There's long-acting or prolonged release of blood sugar into the blood by the production of from amino acids in the liver, known as gluconeogenesis. So your body's always producing glucose. And then there's the glucose or carbs that you eat in your diet. So explain how you control your blood sugar.
Yeah, it's really, it's complex. People don't understand. It's not like you just take an insulin shot and have a nice day. So you're actually, we'll talk a little bit about, hopefully over time, to discuss the new basal insulins on the market that are game changers for people with type 1. And if you are listening to that and you're still on Lantus and Levemir, you are back in the old school days. We are now on Tresiba and Toujeo, which are 42-hour, much flatter basal insulins, more predictable, more physiologic. So if you're listening to this and you're type 1, even type 2s, Tresiba and Toujeo, it's a game changer.
All right, well, explain. Why don't you explain what the basal insulin or long-acting insulin does, and why do you take that?
Yeah, and let's start with that, because this is, I'm sure, Dave, you had people discuss this, because I think there's a real clinical application in people that are bodybuilders that are destroying their beta cell using high dosages of growth hormone. And I know I'm onto something, and people understand where I'm coming from. If you think about physiology, you can develop type 2 diabetes.
All right, let me stop you. Before we get to bodybuilding, I want people to understand how a type 1 diabetic regulates their blood sugar, and then we will progress to bodybuilders and people who take growth hormone.
Right, because it gets very interesting. So a basal insulin is the core. Everybody produces insulin every single hour. That is controlling the feedback from the liver. So if you don't have insulin in your body every single hour, your liver will counter-regulate and produce excess amount of glucose. So you're at a very big disadvantage. A lot of people will say, what's diabetes? It's a disease of not only the pancreas, but of the liver. They're not speaking to each other. And if you do not take a basal insulin as a type 1, and I've seen this, it's like craziness, you cannot regulate your sugar. You need insulin every single hour for the feedback to tell the liver to please stop producing glucose.
Or I think what's also important for people to know is that even if you ate no carbohydrates whatsoever at all in your diet, your liver would still produce glucose in the liver, known as gluconeogenesis, and you would need insulin then to absorb that glucose into the bloodstream, or you're going to get high blood sugars, right?
That's right. No matter what, you need insulin if you're not eating. Okay, so that's the biggest mistake type 1s do, and they end up in diabetic ketoacidosis in the hospital because they're like, well, I can't eat. I got a test tomorrow morning that requires me not to eat. Then they won't take their insulin, and their blood sugars skyrocket. And once it gets over a certain level, you can't rehydrate enough. You can't get the electrolytes in, and then you end up vomiting, diarrhea, and then it's too late. You're in the hospital.
How much of these long-acting insulins do you need to take, and how frequently do you have to take them?
So a long-acting insulin is typically, well, in the past, honestly, our long-acting insulins were, we had NPH, which was very unpredictable and continues to be like the most dreaded of basals because it's the cloudy one. You'll see it as Novolin N, Humulin and NPH. And because it's in this protamine solution, to change the solution to make the insulin absorb, take a longer time to absorb, but it's unpredictable. The predictability of that insulin is horrible. What you want out of diabetes is predictability. So then they came up with Lantus and Levemir. And these insulin by the companies were touted as 24-hour insulins. But if you look deeper into their pharmacology and their pharmacokinetics, they really do not last 24 hours. That's the idea, and they sold billions and millions of dollars on that concept, but doctors started splitting them. So to be totally clear, most of your basal insulins of yesteryear, were Lantus and Levemir, basically did most of their work in 12 hours. So you're looking at them being taken once a day by the layperson and most endocrinologists and internal medicine, but technically they're better dosed twice a day, okay, to get a 24-hour protocol. But now, in 2000, and they started this in 2014, the companies have they learned that there was a need. And so they have developed insulins that they put in very tiny microspheres, so when it's injected into the body, it dissipates much, much slower. They concentrate the molecule. It's insulin, they just make the molecule tighter. So then when you inject it, it's actually lasting, it's much flatter, and it works in a much better way to be a once-a-day insulin. Because that's the idea. Take the basal insulin once a day, and then you take insulin at each meal, depending on what your carbohydrate intake is.
What's the best new one?
Right, Tresiba and Toujeo. Tresiba is a 42-hour insulin, and Toujeo is a 36-hour insulin.
Why do they make these crazy names up for them?
I don't know. The doctors say the same thing. They're like, Colette, why'd they come up with... I don't even have the answers to that. They're crazy names, that's for sure.
All right, so once we got the long-term insulin requirements nailed down on a daily basis, now we have to account for the foods we actually eat, right? So when you have to figure out, all right, going for sushi, I'm going to have 2 sushi rolls. They have white rice in them. They have, pieces of tuna and salmon, avocado, which is fat. How do you determine how much insulin you would need at, say, eating 1 sushi roll?
So where a lot of people go wrong is they don't test their blood sugar, and it blows my mind, So, I use now this Dexcom device. It'll probably, so my blood sugar is 77. I like my blood sugars to stay below 100. Normal blood sugar is between 70 and 120, and the average person should not have a standard deviation, which is how their blood sugar swings after meals, really more than 10. So honestly, many, many people are having standard deviations that swing outside that normal range. And when that happens, you're stressing your beta cell. So my control is so tight. So this is a Dexcom. These are new tools. I don't have to test my blood sugar anymore with the Dexcom. But in the old days, you had to use finger sticks, but you have to know your sugar before you go into a meal, because the higher your sugar, the more negative feedback from the liver. So you're fighting a hormone called glucagon. All right, so you're fighting that issue. Not only are you fighting that issue, you're fighting how much you're going to eat. So you got to take more insulin the higher your blood sugar is. So you got to test your blood sugar. You got to know your correction factor, how much 1 unit drops your blood sugar, and you got to know how much 1 unit covers so many grams of carbohydrates.
How does that work? Explain it.
So basically, there's a lot of applications I'm using on the phones for my patients, but if you do it manually, right, your blood sugar is 200, right? Your goal sugar is 100. So now you're 100 points above normal. Everybody follows me on that, right? So you're 200, you want to be 100, you're 100 points above normal. 1 unit from me drops me 20 points. I need 5 units to bring me down to 100. So that's 5.
Just to get you back to normal,
Just to get me back to normal. But now, Dave, I'm eating sushi. I'll tell you what, sushi is one of the worst things you can do because that rice is soaked in sugar, right? So I already know that if I'm going to have 2 rolls, but you know me, I'll probably have 3. So that is like a shitstorm. I'm going to give myself, let's just say 80 grams of carbs. Now I'm 1 to say 15. Okay. So then you're looking at like at least 6.5, 7, 6, let's say 6 units plus the 5. I need 11 units of insulin to cover that particular meal.
So how many grams of carbs will 1 unit of insulin cover?
For me, everybody's different. And this is why when people work with me, we have to find that perfect, in bodybuilding world, it's 1 to 10. That's not always the case. So it's standard, and when people don't have diabetes, insulin works totally different. It's a totally different world, okay? So when somebody has diabetes, they don't have all the counter-regulatory hormones that somebody that doesn't have diabetes. I mean, Dave, you and I know somebody that injected 100 units of insulin. They still lived because they have counter-regulatory hormones that will keep them alive. With somebody with type 1, they have more of a chance to slip into an insulin shock because we don't have the counter-regulatory. Our body does not feed back right. So somebody that doesn't have diabetes, I mean, I don't necessarily, I know we hear the horror stories, but I think just insulin's very misunderstood, honestly. And in the world of diabetes, people think more is better. Insulin is about precision. It is about timing, and it is about precision. And if you have that in your mind, then you got to get the idea that more is better. It's absolutely not. Actually, less is better, and more frequently is more logic.
Every time you eat, you have to go through this process of figuring out how much insulin you need, essentially, given what your standard blood sugar is, and then what you're going to have to bring it down from the meal that you're eating. Correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, let's transition to bodybuilders. Bodybuilders started using insulin. Okay, I might have been the first guy to do it. I don't know. I think
a pioneer. You're definitely a pioneer. Yes.
I was noticing that I was having trouble absorbing. I wasn't testing my blood sugars back then, but I was noticing I was very flat all the time when I would take growth hormone, and I started experimenting when I put some of these fast-acting insulins in a couple times a day with my meals. What was happening was I was absorbing my food better, and I was growing better. So, obviously we all know that growth hormone kind of works antagonistically to insulin in the sense that it doesn't allow insulin to get to its receptors. And in doing so, bodybuilders are noticing higher blood sugars. And when that happens, the pancreas has to produce more insulin. And as you said, that stresses the beta cells out. So if you had to give advice to a bodybuilder, who was using a lot of growth hormone and maybe was experiencing some insulin resistance, what would your advice be?
And Dave, this is happening a lot, and I'm really passionate about this subject. If I can save anybody from the horror shows of having diabetes, it really makes me actually feel good, because it's really a difficult disease once it gets out of control. And the problem is, we know that type 2 diabetes is a situation where there's certain qualities that happen. It can be a disease of lifestyle. You're not eating right. You're eating a ton of carbohydrates. You've created obesity. You've got central obesity. Your body becomes insulin resistant. Then the body overproduces insulin for a period of time to keep your blood sugar. Your body will do anything it can to keep your blood sugar between 70, really it's supposed to be between 70 and 100, okay? So over time, what then happens is the beta cell will burn out. Done. Then all of a sudden they need insulin. Half of my type 2s need insulin. And then they're worse than me because they have insulin resistance. I don't have any insulin resistance. They have insulin resistance and then they don't make enough insulin. But another thing that causes type 2 diabetes is certain drugs. Corticosteroids, I see it all the time. People that are on high doses of prednisone because they're asthmatics or what have you, they can develop type 2 diabetes. People with gigantism, people that have high levels of growth hormone will develop type 2 diabetes. My AIDS patients that are on high levels of growth hormones and some of the protease inhibitors develop type 2 diabetes. Then I am seeing it too much, too often, fasting sugars above 100, 110, 115. That is glucose. That's impaired glucose tolerance. Anything over 100 is impaired glucose tolerance. Eventually, you're going to be having a problem. And the best, and we know this in the Origin study, there's a ton of studies I can give out you that are actually double-blinded that the insulin companies have done. And the logic is all there, is you give a basal insulin with growth hormone. And I was going to work for a growth hormone company. That was one of the indications with little children starting on growth hormone. We have to test their fasting sugar. And if we see a problem with the beta cell, we're giving basal insulin. I mean, it's really what the missing link in bodybuilding. And it's the risk is not there. It's very, very rare. The data on hypoglycemia on a basal insulin is very low.
Let's just stop for a second, because most bodybuilders want to take insulin not because they're worried about their blood sugars, even though they should be. They're taking it because they think they're going to get a performance boost out of it. And I've done a video before explaining that insulin, while being anabolic in the sense that it drives nutrients into the cells and reglycogenates the muscle, it's not a muscle building hormone. So more, like you said earlier, is not necessarily better. Your I guess goal in trying to educate people, and obviously my goal in this show too, is to let people know that it's about blood sugar control. That's what we're trying to get. So if you're going to take growth hormone and your blood sugar's off, and you test your blood sugar and you have high fasting blood sugars above 100, you probably should be on a long-acting insulin that's going to help keep your blood sugars 24 hours a day lower, not necessarily banging shots of Humalog 16 times a day.
Yeah, that is the messaging that I'm not trying to be irresponsible here. I'm trying to be responsible. And I have had, just in the past when I did Advices Radio, thank you, Scott McNally, on that. I mean, people that have actually looked at what they're doing. We know bodybuilders out there that have believed in this 1,000 grams of carbs, right? And the problem with that is stressing the beta cell as well. Right. Even if you're doing, if God forbid you're not doing insulin, you almost would need to do insulin to help take the stress off the beta cell in that sense. And if you're not, and I think back in the day, a lot of people weren't, and we're seeing this type of type 2 diabetes in a guy that's walking around at 5-6% body fat. It's definitely not the typical norm of what a normal type 2 looks like. I mean, so what they've done is they've presented themselves with insulin resistance for so many years due to lifestyle with the high carbohydrate diets and their insanity to grow and their excessive amounts of growth hormone. I mean, really, over 6, you're going to see some negative feedback. And then 8, now it's 10, now it's 18, so you're going to see glucose resistance. And then the idea of testing that fasting sugar and seeing where you're at and basically trying to predict the future and act proactive, not retroactive. Because by the time that fasting sugar is elevated, you've already lost beta cell function. I am very sorry to say that, but that is the truth. I have all the data on that. So you've already lost. So now what can we do? We can try to keep whatever beta cell function we have safe, and we can do that. And the best way to do that is with basal insulin. I mean, we know that. That's one of the best ways to do it. It can actually help take the stress off the beta cell and hopefully make it stronger. We can't kind of bring back some of those that have left us, but keep those cells that are still alive and working healthier. So we need to, we really need to start being more responsible, Dave, because we're seeing casualties in the sport. And, now that I've gotten older, I know you've gotten older. I mean, I'm seeing some things going on that people just are thinking, I'm living for now. And I'm like, oh man, that's great and everything, but you will be 40 years old or 50 years old one day, and then talk to me.
My thinking always was, before there was really, Lantus was even in my brain, obviously, because we were experimenting back in the 90s, was, Humilin-R, which is kind of a regular insulin. It's not super fast acting. It kind of has 2 peaks. It lasts for about 6 hours in your body. And if you did 2 shots of that a day, you're kind of covering the 12 or 14 hours that you're awake during the day. And then at night, it's not a big deal. Like I said, I never tested blood sugar, so I really don't know how well my blood sugars were controlled. I don't have any issues now, so I'm assuming I did a decent job with it. But what you're saying is, rather than do 2 shots like that of like a regular insulin to just do a Lantus or maybe one of these newer insulins that are just going to cover you 24 hours a day, and then you don't need to do these fast actings because what bodybuilders don't understand is that they're still producing insulin because their beta cells work, so you don't really need that fast acting insulin.
Right. So their bodies are still right. There's no autoimmunity. Okay. So what's going on is you're just counteracting the negative feedback you're getting from the growth hormone. You're adding a positive feedback, which is a basal insulin that works for 24 hours. So you're getting 24-hour coverage, and it's really easy to titrate too. I mean, you know, I definitely work with people, but you know, you start with the dose. Usually with a basal insulin, we start with your body weight in kilograms, and it's starting with around 0.2 units per kilogram. So that would be your starting dose, okay? And then I always tell people to start by cutting that in half. And then titrate. So there's absolutely the fear of that. So you take a look at what your normal body would need. Now remember, this is a person that makes insulin. So then you take half of that. So you've got 0.2 units per kilogram. Take half of it. Take it at night before you go to bed.
So what,
test your fasting
on a 100-kilogram person, how much Lantus would that be per day?
So you figure you got, let's do, because my math is just so fabulous here. So we've got a 100-kilogram person, all right?
Which is 220 pounds, essentially.
Okay, sorry. So we've got, so 100, yeah, so then I'm making this hard for myself. You basically start that person on 20 units. That's what they would need if they did not have diabetes.
I thought you said half of that amount, you said.
You're going to take half of that. So if the person had diabetes, I would put them on 20 units. If the person does not have diabetes, I'd take half of that and start them on 10. Okay. And then I would titrate up. So here's what I would do.
Now, if you're doing 10 units a day, are you doing it in 2 separate dosages?
Not with the new basals. With Lantus, I would then do 5 and 5. Right. So then we'll start 5 at night, 5 in the morning. Test the fasting sugar. If it's 99, it's not good enough. Let's go up 6 and 6, 7 and 7, 8 and 8, 9 and 9, 10 and 10. So then we move it to whatever parallel we need to get the fasting sugar really ideally between 75 and 85. Mm-hmm. That is ideal fasting sugar. That is where the normal person will wake up with a fasting sugar around 84. And there's a really good, ideas floating around in the world of the anti-aging community where you should start utilizing a basal insulin really in your 40s and 50s, because we're starting to see diabetes type 3, which is Alzheimer's disease, because if the brain gets exposed to too much glucose, we're seeing that as dementia and Alzheimer's. So we're using insulin in these patients. This has been done in so many clinical trials. So I have actually in my family 2 people, Dave, that you know very well are now on basal insulin because their fasting sugars were over 100. They've never felt better. It's amazing. I mean, it's really a fast forward way of thinking, and eventually in another 10 to 20 years, people will be on a basal insulin just like you are on growth hormone, you're on insulin, you're on whatever you need, testosterone, whatever you need to replenish your missing link. All your hormones are getting depleted as you age, and insulin is a huge one. And insulin is the impact. I really feel like it is the quintessential thing that is missing in a whole anti-aging approach. And there's a few people out that I've spoken to in LA and in Vegas that are using this approach in their clinics. Oh. These people do not have diabetes. They're preventing problems and complications. Well, there's nothing worse than glucose in the body.
I better start taking this because I think I'm losing my mind, to be honest with you. So I might have to start taking some Lantus. The good thing about Lantus insulins, though, I think is and it's important to mention, is that because it's long acting, if your body senses that there's enough insulin in the bloodstream already, it's just not going to produce extra insulin from the pancreas. So you're really not going to get fat from taking a long-acting insulin, as opposed to if you're taking huge shots of Humalog all throughout the day, you probably will get fat from that.
That's right, Dave, because you're feeding the insulin. A lot of these bodybuilders, which makes me crazy with intra-workout carbs. Dave, it makes so much sense. You're only working out for 50 minutes. I need to have pre-workout carbs. I got to throw in the inter-workout carbs. And God forbid I don't take 100 after the workout because I was killing it so hard in there with my 50-minute workout. I mean, I just hate getting into the whole concept, but it's so ridiculous that I can't stand it. So all you are is feeding the insulin. Yeah. So it's a storage hormone. How much? You can only store so much glycogen in your muscle. Right. You can only pull so many amino acids, but you didn't even barely eat any amino acids, just ate carbs. So where do you think the carbs are going? I mean, and then actually what will end up happening is that insulin you took basically makes you insulin resistant, because then all that becomes storage. That storage fat. There's different types of fat in the body. So now you've taken that insulin that you're thinking is helping you, but actually it's at the end of the day, if it's too much and you're feeding all these carbohydrates, you're no better than a type 2 diabetic that's overeating carbs.
Now,
I mean, Dave, the logic out there, like, we should revisit this conversation, you and I, because I know people are going to listen to it and light bulbs are going to go off, but there's so many things that people are doing wrong with insulin. It's blowing my mind, and they need to step back. It's less is more. Think about the big picture. Get yourself a glucose meter, which, by the way, Dave, I'll tell you, if you need a cheap glucose meter, everybody should go on just Google RELION. It's $10. It's a Relion meter. Don't buy any other meter because it's the strips that cost you the money.
Right.
$10 for the meter, $20 for 100 strips. Nobody, I mean, you pretty much can afford that. You're buying other things with your money. At least test your sugar and find out what's really going on in the background, because I'm just seeing way too many people with issues with their blood sugar, and way too young, and really no other physiology, etiology that would be other than their own situation with how they're managing their lifestyle.
Well, I think one of the problems is that if you go into a pharmacy like CVS, you can go up and ask the pharmacist for a bottle of Humulin-R. It doesn't require a prescription, and they'll give it to you. So the question is, how can bodybuilders convince their doctors that they need to be on a Lantus or a 24-hour insulin and get a prescription for it? Because otherwise, where do you get the stuff,
I know, you cannot get Levemir, Lantus, definitely not Tresiba, definitely not Tagea without a prescription. That goes as well with Humalog, Novolog, and Apidra, which are your rapid-acting insulins. Those need prescriptions. If you really present with the doctor higher fasting sugars, okay, the first thing a doctor will do is give you metformin. So it's in the algorithm. It's like you could be a moron, and that's just what they do. It's changing. The scope is changing. The new algorithm.
What's wrong with metformin? Metformin is an insulin sensitizer. It makes your insulin receptors more sensitive. I don't like bodybuilders taking it because it inhibits IGF-1, but what would be wrong with just a regular person taking that?
So the issues with metformin, listen, metformin is such a controversial drug. I'm actually going to do a talk on metformin because I used to have a very negative feeling toward it. I mean, I've since seen some of that. Look, they're using it in anti-cancer studies, Dave. You know why? Because it's the inhibitory with the IGF-1. Yeah. But it does act on the liver, okay? So my issues with bodybuilders using it is that, look, it has renal clearance. So now there's a new issue that has come out to their endocrinologist that we are actually discharging patients on metformin if they have any issues with their kidneys. So that's a little worry, okay? Then it is metabolized by the liver, excreted by the kidney, and God knows what other, I mean, listen, I'm not to say that bodybuilders are pure as the driven snow, because they may not be, so you're taxing your liver a bit. And then the side effects, Dave, you can't really eat on that stuff. So the problem is it really messes with your GI. And another problem with metformin is if it's messing with your GI, it's messing with your intestinal flora. So it's messing with your immune system. And not only that, it causes a depletion of B12. There's just, to me, Dave, there's too many things that, beat you down to like. Yeah,
well, all the bodybuilder has to hear is the IGF-1 inhibition, and then they don't use it. So you're saying insulin's a better solution. So let's say the doctor wants to put you on metformin. How do you tell the doctor, hey, I don't want metformin. I want Lantus.
Right. It's so difficult, and I've had patients try to do that, and doctors say, no, we have to have you fail on metformin first. You know what I mean? So it's a very difficult run. Mm-hmm. Listen, I could talk to you offline if anybody wants to talk to me about, there's ways around this, just got to be a little savvy on how you speak to the doctors. I mean, this is what I do for a living. I now work in an endo practice, and I'm full time, and you got to know how to approach a doctor or how to have the blood glucose logs that are going to lead you down that road where they would warrant.
Or find the right doctor. How about that?
Or find the right doctor. Find the right doctor that is really open to your lifestyle and understands. You absolutely need an endocrinologist. Your internal medicine guy doesn't even understand what insulin is. What's insulin? You actually inject that stuff? I mean, they're just, they don't get it. They had about a week of diabetes. Okay, so
I found that there's a very I guess there's a scarcity of endocrinologists, because a couple people have asked me to recommend some, and I called a couple people up. There's not a lot of endocrinologists out there. I'd have to say that it's probably the least popular doctor out there, and yet they seem to be in high demand.
They are. The average wait for an endocrinologist is 6 months, okay? And the reason why is it's terrible. They don't have most endocrinologists don't have all the little gadgetry to bill. So a lot of people love to go into the different things they can bill for that, bill for this, bill for that, bill for that. Endocrinology is the least, is the field that most residents just do not want to go into. Yeah. So as per diabetes, 85% are being managed by internal medicine, and only, and the other ones are waiting in line to see the very few endos that are out there practicing.
So, all right, well, this was a lot of great information, I think, for the bodybuilding community to ponder in their heads. If you're using high amounts of growth hormone, when do you think that insulin resistance starts? What dosage of growth hormone per day?
I mean, I really think it's obviously individual. The lighter you are, and then the more growth hormone you're taking, obviously you're putting yourself at more of a risk. So the larger your body, it's just, the bigger the system, the smaller the system. But I mean, I always say when you really start exceeding 6, you're going to see some negative feedback.
Now, Boston Lloyd taking 27 IUs of GH a day. How much Lantus should he be on? Because I know he's listening.
Right. No, he absolutely needs to be on a basal insulin. So
how much?
Well, depending on what he weighs, we could estimate he weighs, what is he, 260?
No, let's give him the same. Let's give him the 100-kilogram guy. So he would take 5 units of Lantus in the morning and 5 at night, basically.
It would never be enough though, because we'd have to counteract the amount of growth hormone.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So how do you figure that out?
So again, I would go by his fasting sugar, but if his his fasting sugar would be interesting to note. Now, even if it is normal, though, we have to assume that there's still this that the body, because he's young, is still producing, overproducing insulin. So I would really go by take 0.2 units per kilogram, and I would go for it, because I honestly feel completely safe that the amount of growth hormone he's taking, that could be his starting dose. And you can go up to as high as 0.7 units per kilogram with the basal insulin. And at that point, what we do is we say that you've exceeded the amount of basal insulin. We then would have to give insulin with each meal. So, he has
no problem doing that. He'll do both. Matter of fact, I told him to start Lantus the other day because I was worried about him, actually, after talking to you. So yeah, he has no problem doing insulin at every meal, because he likes to take those type of things. So
right. And with that amount of growth, I would do it. You know what I mean? I mean, you almost have to. You want to protect your beta cell.
Right.
Have to.
All right. Well, Colette, I know you got Bros vs. Pros this weekend. Good luck there, and thanks for sitting down with us and talking to us and educating us a little bit more about insulin usage. And if any new good stuff comes out, we'll have to do another show and update people on what the latest and greatest technology is out there. Yeah,
there's some cool stuff, Dave. We should definitely sit down. I want to talk about SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1.
Okay.
All right.
That's going to take us to the end of this episode of a very special topic that we talked about today, and that is insulin usage. Hope you guys enjoyed all the information we provided, and we'll see you next time.